Welcome to a PreventConnect podcast, where we explore the prevention of violence against women. This is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
Welcome everyone, this is Ashley Klein-Jimenez from PreventConnect, and I am happy to welcome you to our web conference today, Prevention Town Hall, Advancing Primary Prevention of Sexual and Domestic Violence in the Era of Me Too and Time's Up. PreventConnect is a national project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, sponsored by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views and information provided in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of the U.S. government, CDC, or CalCASA. So as I mentioned, our web conference today will be a little bit different than any you may have attended in the past. We have a great panel of presenters representing a range of work and ideas on how we move forward in our prevention work in this moment in time that we're finding ourselves in. And we're really looking forward to hearing from you all and our guests on how Me Too and Time's Up may have impacted your prevention work and how we can pivot conversations to prevention. So we'll be hearing from folks across the country. We'll be looking at folks who are working with new voices in sectors in order to advance sexual and domestic violence. And then we really want to focus our discussion on what do we do next? Where do we go from here? So that is what we hope to accomplish. And so when I say this moment, I'm really referring to the conversations that have come out of Me Too. And before we get to where we are today, it's so important that we acknowledge that Tarana Burke is the one who identified the power of Me Too back in 2006. And that was really to let survivors, and particularly women and girls of color, know that they were not alone as survivors of sexual violence. And so Me Too has really been going on for over a decade. But in late 2017, as we fast forward, we saw when Alyssa Milano tweeted, "If you've been sexually harassed or assaulted, write Me Too as a reply to this tweet." And you all know what happened from there. It really captivated the country in new and different ways, these conversations around sexual harassment and sexual assault. And so we saw the issues of sexual violence and sexual harassment, specifically around survivors coming forward, really elevated. And so Time Magazine declaring the Silence Breakers as Person of the Year points to some sort of shift that we were really experiencing or are experiencing still. And so we saw this continue into 2018 when some women who work in film, television, and theater launched the Time's Up movement. And so we saw some of this dialogue around Time's Up on silence, Time's Up on waiting, Time's Up on tolerating sexual harassment and abuse, and the organization around a Time's Up legal defense fund. We also saw at the 2018 Golden Globes when a number of actors wore Black to stand in solidarity with survivors and folks who are coming forward to tell their stories. And we saw a group of celebrities bring activists from multiple sectors and multiple movements doing all different kinds of work as their plus ones to the Golden Globes, which I think is another real shift in our conversations around sexual violence. But up until then, both Me Too and Time's Up have really been focused on survivors and the importance of survivors sharing their stories and the importance of people supporting survivors who choose to share their stories or not to share their stories, which is so important. But also, as preventionists, we know that these forms of violence can be prevented. And so many of you, I'm sure, saw Oprah's speech at the Golden Globes. And so I think Oprah really points to this new pivot towards looking at a new day. And so Oprah said, "So I want all the girls watching here and now to know that a new day is on the horizon. And when that new day finally dawns, it will be because of a lot of magnificent women, many of whom are right here in this room tonight, and some pretty phenomenal men, fighting hard to make sure that they become the leaders who take us to the time when nobody ever has to say "me too" again. And so Oprah really kind of embodied this idea of getting to a place and envisioning a world where violence has been prevented, where people don't have to say "me too" again. And so that is kind of one of those pivots that we're really interested in talking about today. And so, David, I know that there have been some other examples of conversations around Me Too and Time's Up to start talking about prevention, and I was hoping you could lead us through some of those.
Well, thank you so much, Ashley. And I think it's important for us to really think about our prevention and how we talk about the prevention story and how this is a both and, how we both are really looking at the leadership of survivors and how we do this, and we talk about how we can be able to take prevention and move forward. So as this emerged in California, not only did we see the Me Too movement, which was actually prior to the Time's Up, we saw in California over 140 women signing a letter of people who worked in the California state capitol, how they had been sexually harassed or assaulted at the state capitol itself by legislators or legislative staffers. And so we saw that attention here. And as we saw that attention moving forward, myself with Lisa Fugia Parks, who many of you know from PreventConnect, who's been a part of PreventConnect from the very beginning, put together an op-ed in the Sacramento Bee, really being able to think about this from a prevention standpoint. And part of what we were trying to be able to do is be able to think about how we can pivot towards that conversation to prevention. And so in this, we want to really be able to acknowledge, and we talked about, now we need to seize the moment to move our political, corporate, and community leaders towards action. We need to ensure that people, all genders, have been harmed or safe, and that people have caused suffering, change in behavior, and amends. We also need to prevent these harmful behaviors in the first place. We know a lot about what works to prevent sexual harassment and violence, and we need to move in that direction. Training about what is and isn't against the law does not go far enough. We need to start changing the cultures of our workplaces and society as a whole to model respect for people's boundaries, encourage bystanders to speak up, and make safety for all a shared responsibility. And so what we were trying to do is be able to articulate a prevention vision. This was also done in California. We just released and I think we'll put a link to this, in California, the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and I was part of this, released a report on the cost and consequences of sexual violence in California. We were inspired by some of the work done in Iowa and Minnesota that had previously done that. And in this, we're really highlighting how understanding the costs are that we need to make investments in prevention to reduce the costs of sexual violence. This report found that the cost of sexual violence in California was $140 billion. Yes, you heard that right, $140 billion in 2012, and that in order to reduce those costs, it would take an investment in prevention, and that's what CalCASA, in partnership with the California Partnership Against Domestic Violence, is doing in this California state legislation. Our colleague also from the Prevention Institute, Alicia Sumjay, and I think Alicia's on the call too, and Sarah Bidekar, wrote this in the San Francisco Chronicle, talking about how we can all build a future free from sexual violence. And so it became another voice of really beginning to think about this from prevention. Sexual harassment and violence have deep roots in our culture and norms. Norms influence our sense of what's acceptable and not acceptable within our community or society at large. Part of what we're seeing in the moment is a sea change in public understanding of sexual harassment as a pervasive social problem rather than a private behavior that's been largely accepted, downplayed, or outraged. And then we calling on how we can be able to move towards changing inequities of our society, really thinking about the prevention work to get to the root causes of our work. In the Huffington Post, I was really appreciating this piece that came from Delilah Bloomberg, who just retired from the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape and the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, and also Reliance, and talked about looking at this as an opportunity, as a critical opportunity to create lasting, systematic change. So these are just some of the examples, and I know that all of you have been doing it, and we'd love to see examples in the text chat about some of what you've been doing. Ashley, why don't you talk about the PBS series that just concluded?
Yeah, so PBS also had a 5-part series called Me Too, Now What?, where they convened a group of individuals from pretty diverse backgrounds, I would say, in some ways, to talk about the impact of pop culture on women in the workplace. They looked at how race and class factor into those representations. They also looked at the social cost of pay inequity and gender discrimination, and then how men can be engaged in solutions, really. And ultimately, they were really interested in looking at and talking about and moving conversations forward on how we change culture. And so I just put a link to that series in the text chat if you weren't able to check it out. I think it's worth it. There's some good conversations in there. And I'd love to hear what you think if you did check it out. David, I'm going to pass it back to you to talk about the facts behind the Me Too movement, this report from Stop Street Harassment.
So Stop Street Harassment, an organization I have tremendous respect for, and I also had the opportunity to work with them in helping support this report that Reliance was one of the supporters behind this, which PreventConnect is part of, put out a survey of a 2,000-person survey and looking at people's experiences of sexual harassment and abuse. And so this became a really useful survey that was collected at the beginning in January and was just released in February. So able to do a very quick turnaround, showing a tremendous number, over 80% of women who report experiencing sexual harassment and abuse. And so it becomes important for us to be able to have the data. And it was once again proving to us what all of us on this call know already, but to be able to look at that data and be able to move this forward. Because when we, as preventionists, want to be able to use data to strengthen enhance our efforts to be able to move forward, and then use the creativity in our community connections to be able to create lasting community-level change. So Ashley, let's go to the audience.
Yes.
How has Me Too and Time's Out impacted your work to prevent sexual and domestic violence? We want to hear from you, the 208 of you who are on the call. And I know some of you are in groups of several people. How has the Me Too and Time's Up impacted your work? And if you have examples of editorials or pieces that you've written, please put them in the text chat. We'll make this part of the record so we can share this with everyone that's in the community. So we want to hear from you as the audience here. How has Me Too and Time's Up, what has emerged as a national discussion since October, impacted your work to do prevention of sexual and domestic violence? And so we'd love to hear from the audience. So go ahead and write into the text chat. We'd love to hear from all of you about how this has been able to do this. And I say, if you have examples of pieces that you have done, and I know this is going to start coming fast and furious, Ashley, so good luck for us trying to keep up with this. Engage youth in our community, and so that we're seeing youth being able to do this in the high school level. Increase of reporting of incidents for both women and men. More conversations, even though I have to recognize that a lot of you already, this is what our life has been. This is exciting. Katie Bailey saying, as a recent college graduate, moving inspired me to take a position as a sexual violence preventionist. Welcome aboard. Panel discussion. Social media accounts having a lot more emotionally taxing. I think that's a theme that we have seen. An increase in friends and family wanting to talk about this ever before.
Oh, I can relate to that.
You can. Invitation to speak at the Women's March and panels. So Paula is sharing about that work. Common
David,
ground in the various audience. Yes.
I also see Christiana said a huge amount of visibility, but also huge amounts of backlash, and I think that's important to bring out.
We will be talking about that. Increased community support, increased conversation to television.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Continue, please, to put anything that you've seen, anything that you're involved in. I see folks are now starting to put some resources, so that is great. Thank you all so much, and we'll return to those because there are so many good things coming out of this. But I think that's a really good lead-in to the fact that we really put out a call looking for people to share how they are advancing prevention work in this new era. And we had close to 60 responses from people who were using this moment in different ways. And we really could have taken all of the presenters. So thank you so much if you responded to that call. But ultimately we ended up choosing a range of individuals and work that we really hope will stimulate some conversations here about what we're doing and where we go from here. And so you'll see that we've selected folks representing across the country, and we'll also share with you where they are from. You'll see that. But I think this might be a good time to introduce our first presenter. And so I am going to introduce you to Natalie Sang. And Natalie is the Ending Gender-Based Violence Coordinator at the New Mexico Asian Family Center, which who would have guessed is located in New Mexico. So Natalie, I am going to go ahead and give you the podium, and we'd love to hear about a little bit about your work and how Me Too and Time's Up has impacted that.
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, you are clear.
Okay, great. As Ashley mentioned, my name is Natalie, and I am the Ending Gender-Based Violence Coordinator at the New Mexico Asian Family Center. I'm born and raised in Portland, Oregon, and I just joined this community last summer. So I'm fairly new to the work, but it's been really amazing and powerful for me as a Cambodian American to get back in touch with kind of my Asian identity in this work. So I want to jump forward a little bit and talk more about kind of our two primary means of prevention work that we're doing here in Albuquerque, Turkey. So first, we engage our Asian men through monthly meetings that we call Tea Talks, and where we offer tea, and we get together and discuss different things each month. There's a theme to the discussion. So far, we've talked about healthy relationships. We've talked about male privilege, and most recently, we've actually discussed the sexual assault allegations. And so we try to discuss these topics all within the framework or understanding of what it means to be Asian or Asian American in the United States, which is a very particular positionality in relation to things like healthy relationships and male privilege. So we're actually having our next meeting this Saturday, and it will be a hike. So we're kind of taking a more experimental tact with this next round of Tea Talks. We're trying to figure out how to do more outreach to first-generation Asian American men to do this, to come join us for these meetings. So yeah, we're trying to pivot our focus to more first-generation Asian American men, because I think these conversations of things like socialization, sex, and consent are definitely things that, growing up in the U.S., my parents, as being immigrants, didn't really talk about these things. And also, I just wanted to mention that me as a queer Asian American, Cambodian American, doing this work is really important for me too, because I'm creating an intentional space that, I would otherwise shy away from, which is, facilitating a men's group. So that's been really important to me as well. So we also do these resting circles, which we just had one this morning, and it's specifically a closed group for Asian women who are survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. And it's an hour-and-a-half long group, or hour-and-a-half long meeting every Tuesday from 9:30 to 11. And it's where we can focus on body work and breath work, and there's a journaling practice involved. And it's completely survivor-led by an amazing woman from the South Asian community who's been practicing yoga and meditation for years and years and years. So she's a survivor herself, which is just amazing that she, is able to do this as part of her own healing. After the first session last week, she came up to me and was like, "This is what I've been waiting my whole life to do." So that was really powerful for me to hear. So just to wrap up on that, we try to include these elements for each of the sessions, so joy, laughter, community, resting, and healing. So that's been really, I think, formative, at least for me, to see what folks are getting out of it. So those are our two kind of primary like prevention work things. So the impact of the Me Too movement, I think the most salient kind of impact that I've seen so far is that in the Tea Talks we've been able to discuss the Aziz Ansari allegations, and so we're seeing this, South Asian comedian actor, and normally we don't see a lot of Asian representation in media, so we were able to talk about that and kind of disrupt what we thought we knew about consent, because it was, there was a lot of talk about gray area sex and what, bad sex and nonverbal and verbal consent, and so we had a really nuanced discussion about all these different things, and we're able to tie it back into what does it mean to be, masculine in the Asian American community, and also just how are Asians portrayed in the media as well. So it was like it was a beautiful discussion, and so that's kind of like the most, the most salient way that Me Too has kind of impacted our prevention work. I can't say the same for the resting circles yet, just because the demographic of the Me Too movement, in terms of my understanding of it, is quite different than our clients in terms of language access, culture, immigration status, as well as race. Obviously, we work at the Asian Family Center. So, and I wanted to bring up the point that, our folks are coming from war, they're refugees, so there's an assumption that a tremendous amount of trauma has taken place in these areas. I know my own family escaped genocide in Cambodia, and having to, live in refugee camps for an undetermined amount of time, and what goes on in these refugee camps. You just have to assume that a tremendous amount of sexual violence and sexual, trauma is taking place. So we kind of go into our resting circles with that assumption so that folks don't, feel the need to disclose, or they can disclose in their own time, or they can take what they need out of it in their own time. So the effect remains to be seen, but I just wanted to point out that the resistance in this case has taken place, in our communities long before the Me Too movement. So in the future, what we want to try to do with our Tea Talks is kind of build capacity in our participants to be messengers in their own communities. And also we want to work towards data collection led by boys and men of color to inform research. And this might take up a lot of different avenues. So what we're trying to do outreach to high schools to see if any boys or men of color at high schools would be interested in gathering data about, what, like healthy relationships, or maybe qualitative data around, violence in their lives or something like that. So for the resting circles, obviously we want it to be survivor-led, survivor-instructed, and we're looking at taking up different forms such as poetry, storytelling, and cooking. And I think I went way over my time, but I think this is the last slide. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them in the chat box too.
Thank you so much, Natalie. If you have questions for Natalie, we would love for you to put them in the text chat, and we'll make sure that Natalie sees those. But thank you, Natalie. I feel I have so many things to say, but I also know that we have so many more speakers. So we'll save those comments for the end. But thank you, and I want to pass it over to Juliet Grimmett, who is the founder of the Chrysalis Network. And Juliet is from North Carolina today. So Juliet, I have given you the podium. How are you?
I am well. Believe it or not, we have snow, which is highly unusual for March in North Carolina. So things are a little bit different. Sounds like the weather's hitting all of us in different spaces. So I am happy to be able to be here with you all today. And thank you, Ashley, for doing such a great job organizing this. I wanted to also really thank Natalie for everything that you shared. I know, and I saw in the chat just how wonderful it is to hear about these organizations that are so nuanced and so important to this work. So thank you for sharing that work too, Natalie. So I'm going to just go ahead and get in a little bit about sort of my foundation and where my work comes from, and then speak to how the Me Too movement has really impacted the work that I do. So my sort of history has been working with rape crisis centers, community-based rape crisis centers, and then most recently, mostly on college campuses as a prevention education coordinator, an advocate, and most recently I was at NC State University at the Women's Center there, sort of directing all of the sexual violence prevention and response work. About 6 years ago, I left because I wanted to continue to do that work, but not just in higher ed and not just with one campus. So I was really fortunate to start Chrysalis Network, and I'll talk more about what that organization does in a minute. This is a photograph of my family, which to me really speaks to sort of my entire approach to sexual violence prevention work, which really stems from an intersectional feminist, family, relationship-focused, radical activist framework. That's my partner, Mark, who also does a lot of this work, and our children, Harper and Sky, who just turned 6 and 9 last week. And I lastly also come to this work as a survivor of campus rape. I was raped as a first-year student. And so while that certainly is part of my identity, it also is part of the work that I do. I do a lot of sort of sharing my story as a survivor, oftentimes April for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. In addition to those lived experiences, I also do have a theoretical framework as a public health educator. I did my master's in public health at UNC Chapel Hill, and so I'm highly connected with CDC expectations, but I'm going to be talking about how I'm kind of shifting that a bit. So the work of Chrysalis Network is multifaceted. I try to do a lot at the varying levels, mostly with college campuses and high schools, but I do a lot of print materials and policy review. Recently, I just partnered with NASPA and the Culture of Respect and helped author some of these core constructs booklets that they came out with, guides that are helpful to doing prevention work. I also, like I said, do a lot with colleges and high schools, and oftentimes that looks like working with employees to do trauma-informed response training, also working with students to get a better understanding of, the power that they have, both as activists, peer educators, and also for their own, like how to move forward in prevention work on their campuses. I also do a lot of work at the state level. I serve on both the Sexual Violence and Domestic Violence Steering Committee through both of our coalitions and Department of Health and Human Services. And some of you may have heard of a conference that I put together, National Conference Solving Campus Sexual Assault and Dating Violence Puzzles. This is last year's Save the Date, but save the date for this year's. It'll also be December at NC State University, where we really highlight the national work of folks doing prevention work. So that sort of hopefully gives you a background of the work that I do, and now I can speak to how Me Too has really influenced it. To me, my experience has been sort of 5 major themes. So in addition to, like all of you, I'm sure, seeing the increased reporting on behalf of survivors and also just multiple requests to do this work, I have seen a lot in the shift in content. And similar to what Natalie addressed, the consent issue has been a big factor. So while I always, incorporate consent and the action components in most of the workshops that I do, I have really sort of moved away from this theory-driven, address this issue and focus on bystander and all of these pieces, to go back to sort of the basics, right? So similar to the Aziz conversation we talked about earlier, and just all of the national landscape, how everyone is talking about or deciding whether something is true or false, and what elements have come out of that. I've really gone back to focusing. There are no gray areas. We make consensual decisions all day long, and this is really because of our faulty sort of socialization, that we have this idea that consent is confusing when really it's not, and there's a lot of clear ways to look at that. Also, this action piece, I focus so much on how action has been a big part and has to be a big part of the work that we do. Specifically, like more people have been coming out of the woodwork, so the Junior League in my area, which I've never worked with before, wanted to do all kinds of work for a full day with all of the women that are part of that organization. So I did this whole activity that they then facilitated on what they could do to take action in that work. The other piece to this, as I said, I sort of threw out the theoretical framework, not really, but I'm trying to change that up, is how important it has become to me to build relationships with folks. And I think Natalie talked a lot about this in her tea talks and her resting circles, that, spending intentional time to talk about these issues. People now, because it's, so much in our narrative, and in the media, want to have real discussions. And in order to have real discussions, we have to have real relationships with folks. So that's really where I've been taking my work. I've also seen a whole lot more holistic requests for programming. So not just, can you come train, our undergrads. It's, can you train our undergrads, our graduate students, and actually our employees, and also can you look at our policy? So that has been really inspiring. I've seen a lot more, which is great to see, just folks connecting intersectionality in all these different movements. So seeing that, gun violence is connected to sexual violence, as is the Black Lives Matter movement. Most recently at my children's elementary school, there's all these sort of ideas of taking action related to racial justice issues, and we finally are now actually doing that. So I think, and I believe the Me Too campaign has been a big part of that. I want to close with just where I hope the work goes. One, I have felt a new inspiration. I think a lot of us do this work, and we sort of do the same thing all the time after a while, and I realized I was doing that, and so I sort of took a step back, reassessed who are all my partners right now and who am I missing, because this work impacts all of us in so many ways. So I have found new partners, and I'm pursuing, doing work with all these different spaces that I hadn't thought of before. I'm spending more time. So for an example, I work with a high school. I always go once a year to do a 3-hour program. Now they're having me come teach a 4-week course. So really trying to build those relationships. I hope the focus remains on accountability. And so when I'm talking about accountability, I mean accountability of survivors, of perpetrators, but also in our privilege, that the groundswell continues, that the movement stay connected, and that we can move away from this, I have to do this work, to I want to do this work.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was great. Again, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the text chat. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next presenter, Marcela Rojas. Marcela is the Sexual Assault Advocate and Prevention Coordinator at El Programa Hispanos Católico, Project Unica, and Marcela is in Oregon. Marcela, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And underneath EPHC, I work through Project Unica, which is a domestic violence and sexual assault agency that primarily serves Latinx survivors and mostly undocumented women. And I specifically teach a class which is called FAS, which is Prevention Against Sexual Assault in Spanish. And so we work with Latinx youth, thinking about issues related to consent, healthy relationships, and we use a bicultural framework and an anti-oppressive framework. So we really come from that in order to end gender-based violence, we also have to address systems of repression. And we take them on community events and field trips. But I'd like to move on to our focus on into and how that has really affected our conversations in the classroom. And like folks before me have mentioned, sometimes Me Too and Time's Up has not reached everybody, and that has definitely been the case with my youth and a lot of the survivors at our agency. And I think that Me Too and Time's Up has really spoken to how prevention needs to be intersectional and really challenge the co-option and erasure of women of color survivors and advocates like Tarana Burke, the founder of the Me Too movement. I've really been enjoying the conversations around Me Too and Time's Up because anti-violence has really reached a national consciousness. And women of color media critics have questioned why Times Magazine chose not to include Tarana Burke as part of their cover story, as well as the ways in which women of color organizers were arm candy and stripped of their agency Golden Globes. A lot of folks were saying that they were not seen as organizers and not seen as advocates. And so I really want to focus on how they were organizers who specifically and strategically utilized the Golden Globes to elevate their causes. And a lot of the folks that were activists that they brought to the Golden Globes were women of color who were organizing against sexual assault as folks that were domestic workers or that were working in low-wage jobs. And so when discussing Me Too and Time's Up with our class students, we asked them why they thought Time's Up and Me Too was receiving so much media attention, but Tarana Burke was not. And they really argued that celebrities often hold power and privilege that ensure that their voices are being heard, even if what they're saying isn't palatable to dominant society. And so I know that a lot of folks are probably going to talk about the backlash behind this. And so although there's been a huge backlash, there has been a lot of support of folks, and there has been a lot of momentum that has reached national consciousness. But for the youth, it's been incredibly important for them to see women of color represented as advocates and survivors, so that they don't see gendered violence as quote unquote and huge quote unquote as a white issue. And so the co-option and mainstreaming of these movements really reminds me of the importance of Black and Brown solidarity, especially when our stories are so often becoming sanitized by the mainstream media and aren't accurately being represented. And so I want to move to looking to the future, because I think there's been a lot of momentum with the Me Too movement, with Time's Up, and with the Parkland shooting as well in Florida. A lot of momentum in terms of youth organizing for policy change. A lot of educators and administrators advocate for trauma-informed schools and more control around gun violence. And so, and also acknowledging that oftentimes our schools are not well equipped with the tools to support youth who perpetuate physical and emotional violence, whether that's gender violence or whether it's gun violence. And even more so are often not well equipped to provide the necessary mental health resources to support survivors after violence has occurred. And so as educators continue to advocate for stronger gun laws and mental health resources, something that I would really love to see is more conversations that address the connections between gun violence and domestic abuse and racism and xenophobia to ensure that really all students are feeling safe. All the way back to things that occurred in Santa Barbara. I'm not sure if folks are familiar, but there was an on-campus shooting at UC Santa Barbara where they had found that the shooter had been someone who committed domestic violence or intimate partner violence, and that had posted, a lot of tweets about women that were misogynistic. There's also just a lot of gun violence that's related to racism and xenophobia and heterosexism, all the way going back to, again, the gun violence that occurred in Florida at the LGBTQ club. And so really having conversations that acknowledge that gun violence is also directly tied to toxic masculinity and a cultural and I also want to focus on the youth organizing against gun violence in Florida. They've made national news, have been really supported by educators and other professionals, which I'm super excited about, but also acknowledging that there have been youth organizing against hate violence and sexual violence in the Black Lives Matter movement, but have received a little bit of a different sort of media attention that has in some ways criminalize them, and I think a lot of folks would challenge this and say that it has a lot to do with respectability politics and who's being supported. And so just leaving us with that and really hitting it home that there needs to be an anti-racist conversation around gun violence and intimate partner violence that addresses the needs of Black and Brown students in our education system. And that was it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcella. You bring up so many good points that we could do whole sessions on some of these issues around whose voices are being elevated, and so thank you so much for that. I feel so bad moving through so quickly, but we may have been a little overzealous in all of our presenters. So I'd love for you all to think about, our first presenters have really pointed to the need to move towards community-level solutions to prevent sexual and domestic violence, and so we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I am going to go ahead and introduce our next guest, but I put the question in the text chat. So our next guest is Haley Harold, the coordinator of prevention at the Metropolitan Organization to Counter Sexual Assault in Missouri. And Haley, you have the podium.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about our programs that we're doing here in Kansas City. So our prevention programs focus on middle school and high school students, and we use a couple different bystander intervention focus curriculums, and then we build around the programming to address additional risk and protective factors so that we can really help youth feel empowered to prevent violence in their school community. So for the middle school, we use the Green Dot Middle School program curriculum, and then we also do Strengths Club programming, which really takes a deeper dive into why violence happens, the dynamics, and then similar to the Green Dot program, pushes students towards having those conversations with their peers. And then each year we hold a leadership summit where we invite students from Green Dot Middle School, so students implementing the Green Dot Middle School program around the metro, to come together and really spend more time talking about influence and how they influence their peers. If you're not familiar with the Green Dot Middle School curriculum, it uses peer conformity, which we know is super high in middle school, to push positive norms. So bullying and harassment are not okay, and everybody feels like they have something that they can do to prevent it, whether that's not laughing, walking away, saying something directly. In the high school, we use the Agent of Change curriculum, and this is, again, a bystander intervention program or curriculum. And what we really like about it is the program has students write scripts, so they get to be the actors, the producers, and hold all pieces of that around the kind of violence that they're seeing. So not only is it incredibly engaging for students, it also lets them take the lead and say, okay, this is what we're seeing, this is what harassment and assault look like, and this is what we hear about. After students complete the Agent of Change curriculum, they design, create a budget, pitch their idea, implement the program, and evaluate it. So this is high school students building their own prevention project in their school. So as far as the Me Too and Time's Up movements go, we really felt this cultural shift happening. And I remember before Me Too and Time's Up, there was a reporter here talking to us about consent, and she was really pushing back and getting hung up on a lot of different aspects. And at one point she asked me, well, do you have kids? What do you tell your kids? And I talk to kids every day about consent, and they get it. It's simple to them. It's clear. Adults, I feel like, make it a lot harder. But since Me Too and Time's Up, we have seen great support in more proactive parents. So we're really lucky here in Kansas City. We have great community support. We're able to get into middle schools and high schools and do this long-term prevention programming. And where we've really seen a shift is parents being proactive, so not just passively supporting, but reaching out to us and what can we do at home, how should we have these conversations. So when parents become more proactive, that just means that there's increased demand from administrators and teachers. We've really seen that the Me Too and Time's Up movement has given us increased credibility. So whereas maybe we had to come in and explain assault and harassment and spend some time like, where have you heard these things? What do they mean? Now students immediately know what we're talking about. Moving forward, we would just love to see increased funding from prevention. We're really lucky, again, here in Kansas City. We have great support from our community and also from funders at the state level. But in order to reach more students across the country, we really have to share our success and then mobilize around what's working and really push funders to support those programs and those projects.
Thank you so much, Haley. Really appreciate that. If you all have questions for Haley, be sure to head over to the text chat. And Amanda Bastiani is the Associate Director of Violence Prevention at the College of St. Rose in New York. Amanda, you have the podium.
Hi, thank you, Ashley. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yes. Well, thank you, everyone, for being here today. I just wanted to just briefly mention my name again, Amanda Bastiani, working at the College of St. Rose. St. Rose recently added a position, which I began in August of 2017, and I was so pleased to see this as a sole focus on prevention education for students and employees, just, ensuring institutional compliance with federal and state regulations as well as addressing campus culture. So I wanted to, go, before I talk about the prevention education and the impact of the Me Too movement and the Time's Up, I wanted to talk about how I honestly see prevention education, including victim support services, as a coordinated effort. I really do see this as an all-hands-on-deck approach as I establish relationships with students, faculty, staff, administrators, as well as our community agencies. So before I talk about the impact of this recent era, I first wanted to acknowledge, and I'm sure most of us are aware, but it's so important to recognize and acknowledge the scope of what we are up against as a culture, as we have become increasingly desensitized to abuse and violence in our media. It has taken several decades. So I wanted to just keep these photos in here, and these are more recent. These are from 2015. So in April of 2015, which is also Sexual Assault Awareness Month, as we know, Bud Light launched the Up For Whatever campaign, and on their label of the beer, it read, "The perfect beer for removing no from your vocabulary for the night." This guy that you'll see here on your lower left is wearing a T-shirt proudly that reads, "Eat, Sleep, Rape, Repeat." He had no idea the person taking the photo at this concert thought that his T-shirt was appalling. He wore it with pride. April 2014, the White House Task Force came out with, they launched the notalone.gov. Also, California was in the midst of the Yes Means Yes, their affirmative consent campaign. And then here on your lower right, you'll see in August 2015, a fraternity in Virginia welcomed new students to campus during opening week with these signs on their residential building. And you can read those for yourself. But again, I just find it that we really have to bring into the light what we're really up against in our culture, and that it's no coincidence that at the same time as key pieces of legislation in California and in New York State were being passed that included universal affirmative consent definitions, that the media outlets came back swinging, right? So we've always had this historical culture clash. So we definitely have to keep that in mind as we do our prevention work. So I really see the impact of the Me Too and the Time's Up movements. They're sparking really good conversations here on campus, and they're giving victims and survivors the courage and the strength to come forward and report. It's also helping to spread awareness and engagement alongside so many other campaigns that we're already doing such good work, which I've utilized, which is the No More and It's On Us, that called on those people in positions of power and leadership to take a stand against domestic violence, sexual harassment, and sexual assault. There have also been some really excellent programs and movements that I've worked with called A Call to Men and Men Can Stop Rape, as well as Mentors in Violence Prevention. They really ask men and people in leadership positions to step up and use their power for cultural change, which I think is just an excellent way to go about this. So I do see these movements as, two more steps. I don't see it as the end-all or the fix-all. I see it as 2 more steps towards cultural change, and I'll definitely use this momentum for awareness and prevention on campus. But I also want to just keep in mind that, here, even in the United States, not every victim felt ready to say, me too. So I want to be careful in my work and in my focus that it's going to take so much more before we see a true cultural shift. And I definitely want to allow, too, in our work to just have those open and honest discussions and allow for the difference of opinion and perspective, and also being mindful of the backlash that we're seeing because of these movements as well. So moving forward, which is I really wanted to make sure I had enough time for this, here at St. Rose, we are establishing a re-education program. So for those that have been found responsible for misconduct related to sexual or verbal harassment or relationship abuse, we're using the opportunity to have them go through an education sanction, which I think is really great here in higher ed. I believe we really do have a duty to educate our students on these issues before they commit major crimes or before they escalate, in the hopes that when they graduate, they're more well-rounded, respectful, engaged citizens. We also do that as responding to culture. So even if we don't have a report come forward, or even if we don't have an official investigation, that we look to respond to culture and risky behaviors and do targeted training for those that need that. We also have done the escalation workshop, which is from the One Love Foundation. Great film and guided discussion on the difference between healthy and unhealthy behaviors. And it also helps young people to recognize abusive behaviors and intervene before it escalates. So we recently put all of our Res Life staff, all of our student athletes, coaches, and staff through this workshop, and plans to continue that going forward. Also looking to increase, some of my friends here on the line that have already talked about those smaller group discussions. Sometimes thinking smaller that's where real prevention can happen, is that, you look to have these targeted trainings. So thinking about the healthy masculinity, we have a group here on campus called Mentality, and they have reached out to me in light of all these conversations that have been happening and the recent media coverage. They really wanted me to come in and have a real conversation about consent, sexual harassment, catcalling, healthy relationships. They just really wanted to have like a smaller group discussion. So I was really happy to hear that, and I will be doing that tonight with a group called Mentality. More targeted training, so going out into middle school and high school students, so reaching that younger audience where we really can have an impact on prevention, primary prevention. And just, really my goal is to get people thinking, a multifaceted approach, move the needle towards change, go where we're needed, go where the students are at. Prevention, education, everyone is at different levels. So I want to be mindful of that as well. And getting young people to identify actions that they feel comfortable taking right now with the hopes of moving towards a shift in a more respectful and civil culture. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And Amanda, if you take a look in the text chat, you will see that folks have some questions for you.
Great.
If you don't have time to respond, I'll make sure that you get those. But thank you so much for that. I want to go ahead and introduce you to our next presenter, Ariella Nekritz, a Prevention Programs Manager at Jewish Women International in Washington, D.C. And Ariella, you have the podium.
Great. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. I started doing this prevention work as a college student, as a peer educator, so I'm so elated to be presenting today. Thank you so much again to PreventConnect for creating this space. At JWI, we're currently implementing Change the Culture, one of our main prevention programs on 8 campuses across the country. It's culturally competent, so it's written to address the specific culture and norms of both Greek life and faith communities. It's multifaceted, so it's incorporating different types of educational mediums, and it's customizable for any campus group. We're working with students to write, implement, and lead those workshops, so they are centered in all of our work. And we think it is so critical to engage men and boys and move away from this model of awareness and start building towards addressing the root causes of sexual and dating violence. We partner with national Greek life organizations and faith communities. Community organizations just offer, support systems and really spaces for learning. And we're meeting our partners where they're at and finding opportunities to incorporate prevention efforts into their existing structures and work. And that can look like, if we're working with a Hillel, suggesting that, that they already have a Shabbat every Friday, why don't they make it a healthy relationship Shabbat? In the era of Me Too, we're seeing a huge rise in demand for programming, a greater awareness generally of sexual assault and harassment and the difference between assault and harassment, a lot of heightened worry and defensiveness from men, and also concern from parents of male students, and more survivors kind of bravely sharing their stories and coming forward, and a greater discussion of community accountability and complicity. What I hear from the students I work with is that the media focus on violence and violation is leaving youth without the knowledge and tools to understand and envision an alternative. And everyone, especially boys and men, should see themselves as the solution and be able to, really vision a healthy, consensual, respectful, and communicative connection. So our vision for prevention work moving forward is to co-create with youth more workshops that lean into current events and delve deeper into consent, communication, healthy masculinity, bystander intervention, and millennial relationship experiences, to provide programmatic opportunities that are really uplifting these positive norms, to facilitate programs that focus on modeling and centering respectful behaviors and attitudes, and really use language that brings everyone into this conversation, and identify more community access points to increase culturally competent prevention resources and reach more people. So please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to figure out ways that we can support other organizations and communities that are doing this work. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ariella. That was great. And for folks who are hoping to connect with our presenters, there will be a list of their contact information in the follow-up materials. So that is coming. I want to introduce our next presenter, Deanne Alcantara-Thompson, the Transformative Justice and Prevention Coordinator for the Coalition Ending Gender-Based Violence in Washington State. Deanne, I have given you the podium.
Great. How's the volume and everything? Okay, great. And I can see my slides. Excellent. Okay, great. And my name is Deanne Alcantara-Thompson, and like Ashley said, I work at the coalition. I work at the county coalition as a Transformative Justice and Prevention Coordinator. So I do countywide trainings and set up as much, sort of support I can for our member programs that are interested in increasing their understanding and engaging interest also in non-criminal legal responses to gender-based violence, as well as supporting existing work that's happening and supporting local prevention work. And I really see prevention work and transformative justice work as being just inherently connected, if nothing else through both of them having the necessity to reflect on and to know what it is that we're working towards, and really like what we believe is possible. So in this, let's see.
I can go ahead and advance that for you.
Okay, that would be great. Yeah, my slides are kind of coming in and out. But basically just, I'm approaching really trying to bear in mind that transformative justice and community accountability was really been led and founded by women of color, and particularly queer and trans people, and particularly Black women, many of whom have been kind of, pushed out of the mainstream movement in many ways. And so just trying to really be in touch with that. And I hope that you can see the slide that says like what's possible. And that's a picture of my brother and my son, and just really wanting to kind of like bring in this thing about thinking about all the people, especially I think for a lot of people, the young people in our lives, and thinking about like what's possible and what can we kind of like share with them so that they know that we're not limited by what some of the negative things that are happening now. And I just also want to like ditto and appreciate so much all that Maricela said about the way that the Me Too movement is really not centering, again, particularly women of color, and really wanting to highlight all of the Black and brown solidarity that's made transformative justice work living and breathing thing in our community. So again, I can't quite see my slide, but I'm hoping to advance to the slide that says famous feminist men and their friends that are breaking my heart. In particular, I think maybe folks on the webinar here are familiar with the Louis C.K. and Sarah Silverman, or Louis C.K. and then also Aziz Ansari, and lots of people have kind of talked about that. And one of the things for me that's been particularly interesting in trying to think about how do we stay engaged and with people that have caused harm. So I love that Sarah Silverman said on her show, I love Louis, and can you love somebody who's done bad things? And she also said, I'm so angry for the women that he's wronged and the culture that's enabled it, and at the same time so sad because he's my friend. And I really see this as one of the things that I really am trying to push for and think about with people that I am engaged with is how do we invite friends and family to stay connected to not only survivors, but also people who have caused harm, to really see it as an opportunity when you are connected to somebody that's caused harm, to kind of think about how do I push them to kind of be on an accountability journey, because we know that people have to kind of take that up for themselves and be inside of their own, they have to want that for themselves, and that can take time. But in the meantime, for people to stay connected and to really be a support of that. And I think the big thing that we need to do as a movement and as a community of people that are working against violence against women, violence against all people, is to be able to build skills. Oh, here are my slides again. Great. So really just getting to commit to redirecting our attention to community, as opposed to and increasing the information that everybody has about what they can do. Also, not just people that have experienced harm, but also people that have caused harm, to think about how do we all kind of lift up our skills around accountability and boundaries. And I kind of think of transformative justice, I know, can be kind of a lofty idea, but some of the beginnings of transformative justice is really so much of the work that we've done in prevention, about thinking about how to stay connected. And I just think that that's such a big piece. And, one of the ways, another beginning that I think of is just every time that an auntie says to a nephew, hey, your dad is drunk again tonight, do you want to stay here? Or actually calls up her brother, the dad that's drunk, and says, hey, you're drunk again. It makes me worried for your son. What do you want to do to fix this? And just really kind of figuring out how we can move forward through that. Thinking about transformative justice as also just really being in touch and recognizing the harms of state violence and not being able to kind of leave that behind. And I think that that's something that unfortunately, like, our movement we haven't been able to be very strong about that. And I think that has so much to do with the racism that is inherent in it has become a big part of our movement. And also looking at, and just the harms of criminalization altogether. And so these are some more resources, but the Northwest Network has a phenomenal relationship skills class that is really a tool, I think, for getting people to be able to build community skills. So much of the work through API Chaya, which is, both of those are local organizations here in Seattle, and then a couple of more national organization that I think is really great for people to look at. And there are images here, and I just wanted to kind of state that those are not my images, but really wanting to highlight these two resources, Survived and Punished, and also The Revolution Starts at Home, as tools that people can kind of get more into.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Deanne. And I have put links to those great resources in the text chat. Really appreciate that. I'm going to turn it over to Brittany now. And Brittany, I'm just trying to find you here. Here you go. So Brittany is the Community Engagement Coordinator at HopeWorks in Maryland.
Hi, everyone. I am cognizant of time. I know that we're at under 20 minutes right now. Really quickly, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has spoken before. I'm really heartened by the mention of anti-oppressive frameworks and the need to acknowledge racism in this work, the acknowledgement of state violence and how we have so much work to do around acknowledging state violence and how that impacts our work. I actually work for a dual DV agency, SV-DV agency in Howard County, Maryland, and we also serve survivors of human trafficking, and we do child sexual abuse prevention work. So we really run the gamut of gender-based violence. Right now, we are really focusing intentionally on, I forgot how to advance the slide. We are focusing intentionally on culture change. And so this is an image that is the property of 11th principal consent, and we use this rape culture pyramid, and we have been using this rape culture pyramid before Me Too happened and the whole Time's Up movement started. And we really focus on the bottom part of this pyramid, victimization. In other forms of this pyramid, the bottom actually says normalization. And so we have adapted this pyramid to hold workshops and to enter classrooms and to have conversations about what are the ways in which we normalize rape culture in our society. And it has been really fruitful and I think really impactful to focus our energy here. And it really, for me, encompasses what PreventConnect has so beautifully articulated with primary prevention, that we focus on the culture that normalizes violence and inequity, and in doing so, I also think that we reach potential aggressors. We did a podcast. So we have a relationship with the community college where we work, and we have a podcast with them. And so we did an entire episode talking about Aziz Ansari and affirmative consent. Something that I want to mention, because we keep talking a lot about racial justice, is like the balance that you have to strike in having a conversation about Aziz Ansari, but not essentializing violence to men of color. So I think what Aziz Ansari provided for us was an opportunity to really talk about the in-betweens. I think a lot of the work that we do in this movement is still very binary, in the sense that we talk about only bad men rape and good men don't rape. And speaking to like some of the comments that other folks have made before, you know, there are people that we love who cause harm. It's very often people in our families, in our friend groups, in our communities. And so how can we hold people accountable when they exist in that space between? You know, Aziz Ansari is a self-identified feminist. There are other people who back him up as a feminist, and I think there is something to be said for Aziz Ansari's intentions being different from his impact. And so it has been really helpful for us to be able to look at the Aziz Ansari case and like look from his perspective, we do this work and it's very easy to see that there was no consent in that interaction. But a lot of folks, like so many normal folks within our society, will look at what happened with Aziz Ansari and they will see consent because there was the presence of oral sex or because she went back to his apartment. So how do we speak to the people who read about Aziz Ansari and find themselves in it? And we've just, I think, done a really we've been very limited in the fact that we're only focusing on, quote unquote, on the bad men when so many folks actually exist in that space between. So for us, I think there is an element of transformative justice in the conversation that we're having. And the way that we want to move our work forward is really, there's a lot of focus right now and intentionality around storytelling and narrative and culture change shifting. So we have our podcast as a place to talk and share and really name explicitly systems, which has been really powerful for us. We also have an arts magazine that we put out every year. Coming up this summer, we are doing a theater production. And so these new spaces that we're branching into, these art spaces where we can really control narrative and storytelling and leverage them in support of preventing and ending violence before it starts has been really, really powerful for us. And I just really want to uplift other folks who have talked to this dynamic of both and, because I think so often we are very limited in the binaries that we work within, and in order to not adopt the oppressor or the master's tools, we really have to expand beyond those binaries.
Thank you so much, Brittany. That was great. If anyone has questions for Brittany, please feel free to put them in the text chat. Russ, I am trying to find you. There you are. So our next presenter is Russ Funk, a consultant and activist, and also part of the steering committee of the North American Men Engaged Network in Kentucky. And Russ, hopefully you are on the line. Okay. I see your message, Russ, and that's very generous of you. Oh, hello?
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Okay. So yes, as I said in the text, I think women's voices need to be raised, and I don't think we have time for all of us to compete or participate at this point. So I'd like to defer my time to the other women on the panel.
Thank you, Russ. I'll go ahead and pass it to Andrea, and we will try to give you some time to share what you're doing. Andrea, I'm going to give you the podium, and Andrea is a Ralph A. Abascal Law Fellow at the California Rural League Assistance Incorporated in California.
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Andrea Pierce, and I am a law fellow at California Rural Legal Assistance, and we are a non-for-profit legal services. In California, we have offices throughout the entire state, and our mission is to fight for justice and individual rights alongside one of the most exploited communities in our society. So we provide a range of legal services. What I do in regards with prevention, if you want to move on to the next slide, is my fellowship focuses exclusively on addressing sexual harassment and violence in California's Central Valley and agricultural industry. So, and this is very important because agricultural workers are so important in our society. They provide California provides about 2/3 of the country's fruits and nuts, and about 1/3 of the country's vegetables. About 830,000 workers in 2014, and about 1/3 of them are women. And one of the biggest issues that we deal with, besides wage theft and discrimination at work, is sexual harassment. And there's very many reasons why, obviously, agricultural workers are exploited. A lot of them are very low income. A lot of them are immigrant. Some estimates between 50 and 70% are undocumented. So what we are doing is, if you want to actually go back to the previous slide, please. Oh, perfect. Yeah, we're doing community education about what is sexual harassment at the workplace. So it's in Spanish, trabajo libre de acoso sexual, and talking about working with a community. And a lot of folks have mentioned where we're conducting these presentations are mostly with school districts, and that's because we know that parents are very active with their children's school, and so we are partnering with our local school districts and migrant education to provide these presentations at their facilities during their times. Also, different community organizations such as that work with agricultural workers, like Catholic Charities here locally. Also, we've done trifolds with information about what is sexual harassment, and we've done in English and Spanish. And we've also done radio appearances about what is workplace sexual harassment and where to report. And we believe that empowering workers to know where they can report sexual harassment and sexual assault in some cases is very, very important. And radio appearances, it's broadcasted in mostly the Southwest, Arizona, California, Washington, Nevada, and Texas. Also, let me see if I can move. Oh yeah, so this is our Spanish trifold, and I can share that information with people if they'd like it. And this is the backside. Obviously, it says what to do if you've been victims, and also more information about it, where you can call in California. We have the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, as well as the EEOC, or Equal Opportunity Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and what the statute of limitations is to present a claim. This is our English trifold as well. And this is just a map of where we are targeting our efforts. We are targeting in California's Central Valley. It's called the San Joaquin Valley, and you will see it demarked in red. And these are the different counties that we are currently focusing our efforts on, but eventually will be a statewide effort. Another one of our training, this is also the English version of our trifold. And in Me Too Times Up Moving has been very useful for us because we are seizing the opportunity to provide outreach. So we're having community organizations contact us saying we want you to provide this training to our parents or to our agricultural workers. Also, we've been working with community organizations to train their staff on how to deal with somebody who comes into their office that has suffered sexual harassment or sexual violence in the field. That way that they have the tools to be able to assist these workers, because we know a lot of the times they will not come to legal services first, but will seek out different community organizations for assistance. So we want to make sure that these community members, again, as prevention, making prevention a community-wide effort, that they know where the resources are available and what are people's rights. Also, as part of our presentations, we are conducting surveys. We know the importance of having statistics to be able to prove that there's a problem and to be able to advocate for our clients. So we're doing surveys on for agricultural workers to determine the prevalence of sexual harassment and violence, as well as demographic data. The most recent surveys say that out of about 150 people, that about 80% say they have experienced sexual harassment in the agricultural industry. Also, Human Rights Watch has said that sexual harassment is a serious problem in the agricultural industry. And CRLA has for a very long time advocated for these clients and has been successful in the courts with bringing forward these kind of claims. So we've done this work before, but this new outreach and Time's Up and Me Too has really been beneficial in making connections with the community and making sure that they come to receive services. And looking into the future, we're going to be continuing to obviously advocate for our workers. As mentioned, CRLA has a rich history of working with agricultural workers and sexual harassment. And we're going to be training our community workers, our entire staff. That way this presentation can go on after my fellowship is over. Also, we have been very active when we've been invited to do advocacy for different bills. This is just one of them, which has training, sexual harassment training requirements now added as of January 1st to all farm labor contractors. And farm labor contractors are third-party intermediaries that contract with growers in order to provide workers. So also creates a problem with who a person is supposed to report sexual harassment with. Are the farm labor contractors, because they're the employer, are they going to be able to adequately deal with an accusation of sexual harassment from their employees? So so that's a little bit about what we do. And I guess that is it. Again, my contact information I will go ahead and put on the chat, and I thank you guys very much for allowing me today.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And I just wanted to let everyone know we don't do this often, but we are prepared to go a few minutes over our 12:30 time, because we do have a couple more speakers that we would love to get to. So if you can stay, we invite you to do that with us. I want to pass it to Meg Stone, the Executive Director of Impact Boston, an affiliate of Triangle in Massachusetts, where it's snowing. So Meg, it is all yours.
Yes, so Ashley, I'm actually going to have to ask you to advance the slides for me, because
you got it.
I have been kicked out of the website, but I do have the slides in front of me. So Impact work to address sexual violence actually falls into two categories. The first is work that gives people the tools to interrupt and protect their own bodies and advocate for themselves in the moment of attempted violence and abuse either against themselves or others using feminist empowerment self-defense and bystander skills. We also work with organizations to help them develop culture, policies, ways of communicating, and ways of interacting that proactively prevent sexual violence. And our specific focus in this area is organizations and schools that exist for people with disabilities. Ashley, would you please connect to the next slide? Thank you. So I've been listening to a lot of the other presenters talk about social norms, talk about consent, talk about boundaries, and I really want to just take a second to address some of the unique culture change needs in organizations that exist for people with disabilities. Other people who work with other youth populations are talking about sex and sexuality and dating and relationships, whereas we are actually seeing the first generation of young people with disabilities who have been taught that they have any access to dating or sexual or intimate relationships. And a lot of the issues with consent are as much about caregiving and support and service providing, because there really are norms within organizations that serve people with disabilities that people whose job it is to help and care for people with disabilities touch people in ways they don't choose, interact with people's bodies in ways that don't require any consent. And the effect for a lot of folks with disabilities is basically socializing people to expect that they will be touched in ways that they do not choose. Next slide, please. So what our work is really working with schools and disability service organizations to take a very specific and sometimes painful look about all of the underlying assumptions of special education and disability services, and to really make organizational sexual abuse prevention work mission-based. So it really starts with working with a school or organization to clearly identify their culture, their values, their expectations, and to look at all of the assumptions that they make every day when they go and work and really challenge ableism, attitudes about people with disabilities, ways that caregiving and service providing and education can transmit some ableist messages. Also to infuse within any prevention strategy a organizational culture that supports choice, that supports caregivers and teachers and educators in getting consent for touch, even when touch is medically necessary. So the other challenge that we're looking at, if you would advance to the next slide, is looking at the realities of a high-stress organizational workplace and organizations in which teams really need each other and depend upon each other. So we're looking to create teams within a disability-specific school that are cohesive enough to grapple with and struggle with the complexities of what it means to prevent sexual abuse, and at the same time not so loyal that they won't speak up or challenge each other or come forward when a person with a disability might be at risk. So my final slide, I really see the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement as both an opportunity and a challenge. Organizations are really seeing themselves in, the Weinstein Company, in all of the high-profile organizations that have been, subjected to bad publicity, lawsuits, other consequences for failing to appropriately act when somebody in power was sexually abusing. And at the same time, there is a real tendency on the part of institutions to want to focus on risk management and focus on preventing liability as opposed to transformational social change. So as preventionists, I think a really important challenge we face is to infuse social justice and values-driven and empowerment model ideas into institutional change efforts where a lot of times the motivations of the organization are about reducing liability and sort of creating the most easy and efficient and expedient ways of saying that they are preventing sexual violence. So the more evaluation work we can do, the more research we can do, I think the better positioned we will be to be able to advocate for a social justice approach to organizational prevention. Another key reality of a lot of organizational failures is that individuals did not have the skills in the moment to intervene, or they had the skills but they didn't feel safe enough to intervene. So really making a connection between what do I do to manage my physiological stress response so that when I see something unsafe, abusive, potentially abusive, I can intervene in a way that maintains my own safety and effectively addresses this attempted abusive act. And at the same time, really creating organizational cultures that support self-advocacy, resistance. You know, we're seeing this with some of the Parkland activism where institutions are explicitly supporting students challenging and resisting, whereas other institutions are not. So one of the biggest challenges that we face is to ensure that as organizations become more urgent about this, that we can, as a movement, direct the urgency toward liberation, even in an institutional context.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Meg. I love this idea of moving from individual resistance to collective resistance, which I think is a really good lead-in to our last two presenters. So thank you so much for that. I am going to go to Mary Iannone, a program manager at Breakthrough. And Mary, you should be able to advance your slides.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to my fellow presenters, and thank you to everybody who stuck around. I know we're going a little over, so I will be quick. I completely agree that Meg is a great lead-in to what I'll talk about today from Breakthrough. Breakthrough is a global human rights organization. Our mission is to make gender-based violence unacceptable. And we do that with our leading motto as human rights start with you. So often I come across people in any space really that say, you know, I'm fired up, I'm fed up, I want to do something, but I'm not an activist, you know, I don't know how to do all of this. And I say, they're like, you know, I can't be up doing all the stuff that all these big people are doing. And I say, you don't have to be, because human rights start in our intimate spaces, in our work spaces, in public spaces that we walk through every day. And so what we want people to realize is that you can use your interests and your expertise and your skills to make change happen in your community, which is the domino effect that leads to change happening around the nation and around the world. And so we use a culture change perspective, which many of my fellow presenters have mentioned as well. And so what we want to do is not interrupt violence or norms that lead to violence. We want to truly disrupt them. So often talk and movements like the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement kind of dies down after a while, and we kind of see it going away, and it becomes like a Wikipedia page, like, oh, this happened from October 2017 to end month. And that's really not happening this time. It's almost 6 months later, and it's become kind of clear that Me Too isn't really going away. And in fact, it's snowballing into different movements. I personally think that the activism of the students in Parkland, Florida would not be getting the response that it's getting without the recency of Me Too. And the realization that the collective energy of people coming forward and sharing their stories and pushing for change leads to greater change. And we take our constituents through kind of a process of identifying norms and practices in your community, how those norms and practices lead to harm, and then, like I said, using your skills and expertise to determine where in this chain of violence you can disrupt and transform into change. And then we really push people towards taking action. And action can look different given your ecosystem. You know, yes, there are people who go to protests and rallies and organize women's marches. And there are people who can make change in their own communities, uplift women's voices, curating your social media feeds so that you're listening to marginalized voices who may not be in your immediate ecosystem. You know, uplifting those same voices in meetings or in presentations, hat tip to Russ. Or smaller things even, like standing up to street harassment. And so we do this primarily through our program that's just called the Action Lab. And we work on campuses doing regional programming. This graphic is from our most recent Action Lab, which was in New York City in July. We had 25 students from 18 campuses in 6 states. We actually have our next Action Lab coming up next weekend. So it's very busy here in New York, getting ready for that at UNC Chapel Hill, where we'll have about 15 students from 6 different campuses in 3 states. And we take them through the process that I just outlined. What is the problem that you see happening in your community, and how can you use your skills, whatever you're studying in school, whatever technical skills you have, to make that change happen? And what's next for us is, given the immediacy and expansion of activism with young people, we are expanding into high schools. And our next partnership is with the Bella Academy in Brooklyn. It's an all-girls school in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, with 9th and 10th graders. It just opened this past year. And we'll be turning our Action Lab into a much longer student club where students can come together and talk about these issues and create actions and campaigns and events that they can implement in their school or in Brooklyn or in New York or on social media. We really want the students to lead this charge, and so we kind of leave it up to them as to how they want to do everything. And we're hoping to expand beyond into more high schools in the future. So I'd love to speak to anybody who's doing student work, and I know our contact information will be shared afterwards. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Mary. Really appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to our final presenter today, Rebecca Moore, the Community Prevention Specialist at the Council on Domestic Abuse in Indiana. Hi, Rebecca. Thank you so much. Can you close us out for today?
Sure, and I'm so thankful for everyone who stuck around, and I absolutely promise to be very cognizant of time. I will talk very fast and get through this. Okay, so first thing we do at CODA is our education services are all focused on assisting our community to empower, strengthen, and help our community to grow as a community unit. We're teaching boundaries, developmental assets. We're talking about those safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments. We're training on equality versus equity and privileges. We give them tools for self-care, self-esteem, self-growth. We're also focusing on the mental health first aid, bystander intervention, and talking about digital and social media safety. So that's just like a brief wrap-up of what we do in those education services. But CODA's role, we believe, is to build that collective we within our community, within the Wabash Valley. So the slides that you're seeing here, I'm extremely proud of. We have been sending this series of quilts, if you will, around the state of Indiana. We have had multiple youth councils throughout the state participating in this, and each one of the youth in all these different councils was able to write what they thought was a safe environment, a safe relationship, a stable environment, stable relationship, a nurturing environment, and nurturing relationship. And then these were displayed in December at one of our state conferences. So it was pretty cool to see what our youth had to say. Well, that drove me forward, and in December of 2018, I went to our local youth council, and said, what do you guys want to do for 2018? What does 2018 look like for you, and how do you want to push forward? And they brought to me the hashtag #MeToo. They're like, we want to do something with this. We want to get on board with this. and we need to push forward. So we just this past Tuesday had a conversation at one of our local restaurants, Qdoba, and just had a group conversation in public about what Me Too and Time's Up and even the Parkland shootings, what all those had to do with each other and how they're impacting our students within the schools and what our students can do to drive the mission of these forward. We're also going to, the conversation was so intense, there was 10 of us that were talking that night, and it was so intense, and we didn't get to finish the conversation, so we've actually continued it to March 21st, where we're going to continue that conversation as a group. And then we're also looking into other ways that women are potentially being victimized. And we have someone coming in and talking to the youth and training the youth about female genital mutilation. So we're stepping outside of our comfort zone, and these are all things the youth said, this is what we want to do. This is what our interest is, and this is how we see a change coming about, and this is what we want to have happen. So our youth have really driven the conversation. In 2018, we plan to increase our presence in the community, especially around the Me Too, empowering individuals to stand up, step up, and say, hey, we've had enough, and let's not let this happen. We're going to continue to offer the healthy relationship training. We would like to hold a Youth Council Summit. We're going to continue to strengthen the partnerships that we have while creating new ones, and then bring more awareness, more education to the community to hopefully drive this conversation forward, to keep this dialogue fresh, and to keep it in the community so that people are talking about it. And hopefully the more people that talk about it, the more people will stand up and say, this isn't right and we need to do something. And those that have been victimized know that they have others that can stand with them. So that's me, and I hope I got it all fit in there.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was amazing. And I actually really love that we're ending on this idea from you all at CODA to build a collective we. And so thank you so much. So thank you so much for our presenters and for those of you who all stuck around as we went over today. We would love to know what our next steps should be. What are you planning to do? What should we do? How should we continue this conversation? And so that will actually be part of an evaluation question that you get, so feel free to answer that then. This was recorded. You will receive an email when the recording is available. You will also receive an email when all of that follow-up material is available to download. So be looking for that. But we'd really love to hear what you liked about this format, what you didn't like about it, and we hope you have a good rest of your day. So thank you so much again, and we will see you on the next web conference. This concludes today's session.
Thank you for listening to this PreventConnect podcast. PreventConnect is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, with funding from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views presented on PreventConnect are not necessarily the views of the United States government, the CDC, or CalCASA. To learn more about PreventConnect, visit www.preventconnect.org. For more information about CalCASA's mission, or to show your support, visit calcasa.org. That's CalCasa.org.